Welcome to What Dogs Have Taught Me. I'm your host, Julie Hart, and this is the podcast where we stop to wonder if we are truly grasping the lessons our canine companions could teach us. I'm a dog rehabilitator, here with something you may not know. The greatest teachers about dogs aren't necessarily human, they're actually the dogs themselves. At What Dogs Have Taught Me, we dive deep into the educational, practical, and sometimes controversial aspects of understanding our canine companions. Whether you're a seasoned dog trainer, devoted rescuer, loving foster parent, or simply someone who shares their life with the dog, this podcast is for you. So whether you're looking to deepen your understanding of dog behavior, refine your training techniques, or simply revel in the magic of all things dog, you're in the right place. Let's have a heart-to-heart. Today I'm going to go through some things I see a lot of people doing with fearful and feral dogs that are actually inhibiting their progress. A lot of these things are being done from misunderstanding and from good intentions. So I'm not trying to, make anyone feel bad or call anyone out. But I do see a lot of the same things kind of happening over and over again. And, one of my purposes and passions is to raise the standards for fearful and feral dog rehabilitation. By working with feral dogs extensively for the past 6 years and fearful dogs for the past 16, I've learned a few things by watching them. And some of the things I used to do are not things that I do anymore. So it's important, as professionals and also just as dog owners, that we watch our dogs and see if what we're doing really is helping them or not. I've been reading, or I should say rereading, Temple Grandin's book, Animals in Translation. And in here, she goes into how people see what they think the animal is, but they don't actually see the real animal. One of the quotes from Temple Grandin is, "People are focused on their own thoughts about animals, but not on the animals or the real animals' behaviors." To me, this means people think a fearful dog or a feral dog will behave a certain way, and they behave according to what they think is going to happen, not what is actually happening. And this goes back to people just being in their own heads and not actually paying attention to what's going on. So whenever you're working with a fearful and feral dog, you really need to pay attention to if what you're doing is actually helping the dog or not. And we need to get rid of our thoughts about dog training dogmas and if one way is better than the other. Because I've seen people use all kinds of dog training methods and they don't work well for the dog. But those people still keep doing it because that's what they think should work, even though the dog in front of them is telling them it doesn't work. So I always try to be very observant and hopefully open to what the dog is telling me is helping them or not helping them. And of course, we're not dogs. We're never going to know everything about them. But as long as we pay attention and really are present and don't get in our own heads about, a couple myths I hear about fearful dogs a lot is that putting stress on them will cause them to be more afraid or aggressive. It's just not true. How you put that stress on them matters a lot and how much stress. But without stress, there is no change. If we didn't have any stress put on us for, even when we're hungry or wanting to make money or wanting to learn more or wanting to learn how to go scuba diving, we would never actually achieve anything. So stress is actually a very important factor in rehabilitating fearful and feral dogs, and realizing that stress can be very good and actually will build a bond between you and the dog if you make things slightly challenging but achievable and approach the dog in an appropriate way. So it's super important to pay attention to what the animals are actually telling you. On the flip side, it's also important, to pay attention to what is not working. Not one size fits all, and sometimes things that I've done that work for a lot of dogs won't work for one dog. And so I have to think outside the box or modify what I'm doing to suit that dog in front of me. I will say probably the most common thing I see people doing, and this is not just your average dog owner, this also includes a lot of dog training professionals, vets, rescuers, is that they approach the dog in a scary way. Many well-meaning people look directly at a dog, and this is especially important not to do with a fearful or feral dog, but even with every dog. To every dog, their first language is dog. And to dogs, when another dog looks at them directly in the eyes, it's rarely with good intention or friendly intention. It can be a warning. It can be like, hey, stop, I want my bone. Or, hey, stop, I don't want you to invade my space. But we humans, we use our own language, and we wonder then why the dog is backing away from us. And I find that people are very unaware of how they're approaching a dog. They may think they're not looking at the dog, but they really are. And so if you're having trouble with this, or let's say a fearful or feral dog is growling at you or snapping at you, I would suggest that you video yourself with your phone, how you approach the dog, and then analyze it and see when the dog started to get really concerned and what you were doing to cause it. I can tell you that I have gone up to many, many feral dogs, and they have not been terribly afraid for me or tried to run away. They probably go a little more into their freeze mode of survival, but never do I prevent them from running away from me. And if you approach them with the right energy, with the right body language, the dogs will generally not be as afraid of people as you may think they are. A lot of people tell me, well, how do I know what the dog's doing if I can't look at it? Well, you can use your peripheral vision. You can feel what the dog's doing if you're holding a leash that the dog is attached to. You can feel like the slightest growl vibrate up a leash. You can feel a dog give in a little bit to tension on a leash or move with you or pull back. And you don't have to be looking at the dog. So I would advise people to stop using their sight so much and rely more on your other senses, your intuition being one of them, but also your sense of feel. When you're holding a leash, it can tell you a lot. The other thing a lot of people are concerned about is, well, how do I get a leash or a collar on a dog if I don't look at them? And I can tell you it's completely possible. I've had a lot of practice doing it, so for me, it's not as difficult. But at first, I had to very consciously not look at the dog in the eyes. You can look, if you're trying to put a collar on a dog, for example, you can look over the dog's head and to one side, and you can still see what you're doing with your peripheral vision and how to attach the martingale collar or put a slip lead over the dog. And if you have a problem knowing how collars work, then figure that out first before you go to put it on a dog. This little puppy I have now, Trix, I'm taking the leash off of her now when she's in her crate. And that means that I have to attach it before she comes out of her crate. And I can do that pretty much with just my hands and not even putting my head anywhere near her vicinity. If I do have to crouch down and look into the crate, I make sure to look to the side of the dog and not directly at the dog. So there's lots of little things that we can do that tell a dog we're not threatening. And all of these little things add up to the dog realizing you're not a threat and you're safe to be around. Another time I see people looking at dogs is when they go into a kennel or a dog shelter to put a leash on them. And a lot of times I'm like, you're looking at the dog. Stop looking at the dog. And they're like, but how do I know it's not going to bite me? I was like, well, if you're looking at it directly in the eye, there's a much higher chance it's going to bite you. But again, you don't have to look directly at something to see it. And so you got to use your peripheral vision and educate yourself on what dogs look like when they're tense and know how to alleviate that in a dog, and take your time when you're leashing a dog. You don't have to walk in, put a leash on the dog, and leave the kennel. There's no race. There's no prize for doing it quick. There is a prize for doing it in a way the dog can absorb and understand and not feel threatened, and that is that the dog will trust you. So a lot of times, we're in a rush and we're just in our head and we have a checklist, we got to get stuff done. But what we actually do by having that kind of mentality is the dog feels less trusting of us and everything's going to be harder and take longer. So it's actually much more efficient if we slow down and pay attention. So other ways, at adoption events, I've done adoption events for 16 years now. Most people want to hold their hand out for a dog to sniff. You don't have to do this. Stop doing it. All you're doing is like throwing a fist in the dog's face. The dog can smell you from several feet away, if not more. And if they want to sniff you better, just stand there and don't look at the dog. And chances are the dog will come up and smell your feet or your pants legs or something like that. And then if the dog feels comfortable, you can squat down and give the dog a scratch under the chin. There's no reason to come up, looming over the dog. Another thing I would recommend not doing is do not bend towards the dog or over it. Squat down instead. And if you can't squat down, either go to the gym or, use a chair or a rock or something around so you can get down on the dog's level. This helps them a lot because we look really huge, especially to small breed dogs. So another thing I do a lot too is to approach the dog while I'm facing sideways or backwards. So when I enter a kennel that the dog is in, I open the latch without looking at the dog. I unlock the lock without looking at the dog. I open the gate, I walk in, and then I usually approach backwards or kind of sideways, depending on the dog. I don't want to move too slow because then I become predatory. But I don't want to move too fast either because then I'm just going to scare the dog. So you just have to be kind of a naturally slower pace with soft energy and avoid facing down the dog when you're approaching it. I've seen people move extra slow around fearful dogs thinking they're not scaring them. But especially if that person is looking at the dog while they're doing it, they're actually being very predatory and the dog thinks they're stalking them. So the dog gets super afraid of that person. So again, you have to be kind of natural with this and not overthink it too. One of the biggest mistakes I see made, especially with fosters, rescues, and dog owners, is not using a leash on a fearful or feral dog. And I get why. Because I have had a lot of clients who were not really told how scared their dog is by the rescue. And when they got home, they thought the dog was somewhat normal, and they took off the leash and collar or harness or whatever the dog was on. And usually these clients contact me a few months later and can't get a leash on the dog. And so the dog has been loose that whole time, just, left to its own devices basically, because you can't guide it in any way whatsoever without a leash. Now, some people may be like, well, the dog doesn't know how to walk on a leash. So if the leash is on, and I'm teaching the dog to walk on a leash, the dog's going to freak out. Or maybe the dog's afraid of dragging the leash. But I will say most dogs get over having a leash attached to them in a few hours, and they'll drag it around my yard just fine. And yes, it's kind of a pain because it will get caught on stuff. So you can't leave a leash on a dog while you're not home if the dog's out in your house. But having a leash on the dog is the only way we have to guide these dogs to braver behavior. There is no other way that I can think of, because they don't want to be near you, they don't trust you, they're not going to take food, and they don't want to play with toys. Maybe one way to lure them to you would be to pet another dog, and they might come up, or to hold out a treat, and they might come up and take the treat, but they're going to retreat right away. So I will tell you, from 6 years of experience training, I don't know how many fearful and feral dogs to walk on a leash, it actually has some kind of taming effect on them. I'm not sure why. I don't know all the science behind it. But when I teach them to walk on a leash, within 3 sessions, there's usually a huge improvement in trust of the handler. So keeping a leash on the dog is actually kind, because you're going to be able to move that dog through fear or being feral into being a happy pet much faster than you would if you don't leave a leash on the dog. And so to me, that's much kinder than letting the dog run around, hiding in corners, not coming inside, staying in the yard when people come over. I've had dogs that won't go outside to go potty, and so they poop and pee in the same corner, that they hide in. And so these are really bad situations for the dog's overall welfare. Even with a dog that's slightly fearful, with a leash, you can form brave behaviors and behaviors that you want the dog to do rather than fearful behaviors. It's just like when you bring a new puppy in the house, if you train the puppy and kind of limit its freedom at first, and so it only does things that you want it to do, it only chews on its bones and toys instead of your couch. It doesn't run all over the house and go to the bathroom all over the house, but it actually is with you on a leash or contained somehow, and you can take it outside. Those puppies are forming behaviors that are going to help the people that have them and the dog. So it's kind of that same theory that when we bring a new dog into our house, even if it's not fearful or feral, a leash is a great way to be able to communicate with the dog. If your fearful or feral dog doesn't know how to walk on a leash, you can teach it. It's not terribly difficult, but it takes a lot of attention and being present. And I actually have a video that shows how I do this, and it's available for purchase if anyone wants to learn how. I also have several free videos on YouTube, but they don't go as in depth as my video that I have for purchase. Things the dog can, the dog develops fearful habits, and then the owner is constantly trying to catch the dog or trick the dog to putting a leash on it. And this sets up a whole series of trust-breaking behaviors, right? Every single dog I've rehabilitated has learned to walk on a leash during the first session, at least minimally, and usually wears a leash around the house between 1 and 3 weeks. With regular foster dogs that I bring in, it might be less time than a week. It might be a few days. But using a leash speeds up the rehab process because I can guide the dog to engaging in fun activities with me. I can take a dog for a walk. It can get exercise. It can go out in the yard and not stay out there and scared. Of course, when you're using a leash with a fearful and feral dog, a huge concern is the dog getting loose. And the way I avoid this is I use a properly fitting martingale collar or a slip lead, and I back it up with a safety to another collar. If you don't know how to do this, I have a video on YouTube. It's called The Best Way to Back Up a Collar and Leash. Everyone says, oh, well, I'm afraid the dog's going to get out of the slip lead or a martingale collar. If the dog does that, then you haven't fitted the collar properly. Do not use a regular flat collar with these kinds of dogs. They will get out of it. And people always want to use a harness because they feel they're kinder to the dog. I will tell you, I don't think that's true. I think harnesses are so invasive for a dog to wear, especially a free-roaming street dog. And they're very difficult to get on and off. And I do think they do not give as clear communication to the dog. And therefore, it's just harder for everyone to work with a harness. I just use, and I must say that harnesses, if they're not fitted properly and they're not made out of nice materials, they can actually cause, pretty severe skin abrasions to a dog. And if you have a fearful dog or a feral dog, a lot of times people leave the harnesses on them. And so that dog is constantly wearing around like this vest. So I'm all for a slip lead and collar. And again, take the effort to find out how to fit it on your dog properly. There's tons of videos out there. Not using a leash brings me to the next thing I see people not doing with fearful or feral dogs, which is exercising them. Of course, a lot of these dogs, if they don't have a leash on, obviously they can't go for a walk. But a lot of times they kind of just revert to being afraid. They hide in a corner. They don't get a lot of exercise. And lack of exercise can contribute to stress, depression, anxiety. And, we all know exercise for us does lots of benefits, right? It raises dopamine, it makes us feel better, serotonin, all this stuff. And so a big component to fearful and feral dogs rehab is exercise. Exercise is integral to a dog's existence. They can walk many, many miles a day at a faster pace than we can. And that doesn't mean you have to do that with your dog, but even getting out and getting a little bit of exercise will make a huge difference. And you're doing something your dog enjoys with the dog. Now, a lot of times people be like, oh, my dog's so scared to go on a walk. At first, again, it's going to be a little scary probably. But again, a life without any kind of stress means no progress at all. Of course, you want to make that walk or exercise the least stressful you can, but you can only control the world so much. So I advise at first, go out during quiet times of day. Maybe if you have to, even drive to a quiet area if you live on a super busy street. There's ways to do this that you won't have to do forever, but it'll greatly enhance the dog's life and its bond with you. For our feral dog immersion program, which is a 6-day training program with feral dogs, they lived in a rich environment with 5 people, and we went on a hike every day. The hikes were only about a mile and a half, but there were a lot of things for the dogs to smell. They enjoyed being with a group. They got exercise, and they quickly bonded with the people they were with because of this. You don't have to do extreme hiking with your dog, but, exercising with them creates a bond and it builds trust while activating all the feel-good hormones in your dog's body. It's a natural way to improve your dog's mood without the use of medications as well. Which I want to add that I cannot think of a fearful or feral dog that I have rehabbed that I put on medication. I find it is not necessary. I find it's actually makes the dog worse in many cases. Trazodone seems to make a dog worse. I have 2 examples of that happening with my own dog, Chardonnay. She was always a little freaked out at the vet. And so one of the vets I went to was like, well, maybe we should give her Trazodone when she goes into boarding or comes to the vet office. And at the time I was like, well, I'll try it and see if it helps. And I can tell you it actually made her worse. And then, of course, what does the vet say? Oh, well, we need to up the medication. How about we just need to take the dog off the medication and work on building her comfort in the vet office. I gave that to Chardonnay a few times when she went into boarding too, and each time she would be more and more scared of boarding. And there was no reason for her to be. My other dogs weren't scared of boarding more. Nothing bad happened to her there. It was just who she was, and adding the trazodone, I think, made the whole thing worse. I recently had a dog that is with our rescue Onyx at my house for a few days after a surgery. And I have taken Onyx to the vet many times for quite a few number of years. She is permanently fostered by someone else. Onyx seemed to have more problems at the vet. And I will say Onyx has always had issues with being restrained for a bath or a vet exam. And she's not going to bite people, but she will flail around and give them a hard time, and she gets very scared. There's a reason why she does that. I won't go into it, but there is a reason. And I know this for a fact because it was witnessed. Even so, her intensity is a little extreme for her experiences. So there's probably some genetic components there, right? And again, the vet she was going to see said, hey, let's try some trazodone to see if it'll help her calm down and so they can perform all the vet services better. And I was like, well, okay, let's give it a try. Onyx doesn't live with me. Other people had to take her to the vet. So I thought, all right, let's give it a shot. And what I saw is that Onyx kept getting increasingly worse at the vet office when she was taking the trazodone. And she was just given the trazodone the day before and then the day of the vet visit. So she wasn't on it all the time. I had a conversation with the vet manager and explained how it was making her worse, and can we just take her off the trazodone and, work on her being more comfortable in a different way. And the vet was like, sure. And then she had to have this surgery, so she had to go to a different vet. And I thought, let's just not give her the trazodone and see how she does. And I can tell you she was much better at the vet without the trazodone, basically had a better experience. And I took her to the surgeon twice. And I saw that to be the case both times when she is not on the trazodone. Now, when she came home from surgery, she was on trazodone, gabapentin, I believe, an antibiotic, and Rimadyl. And I did give her the trazodone then because she's very comfortable at my house. She's not afraid of anything here. I wanted her to keep the cone on her head. It was really important that she didn't get to lick the incision site. So I did give her the trazodone just as a sedating helper for that. And it seemed to work fine. But I will say that when she was on the trazodone and gabapentin and I took her for a walk, she definitely was off balance. And she was not with it. She was sedated. And that's not going to make a dog feel better. It might keep them from acting fearful or afraid or whatever it is, that's making them act that way. But it's not going to solve the issue. So that's my little speech about medications. I do not think it helps. I think it helps people feel better because they're doing something. But I would say people need to learn how to work with the dog without medicating them, especially the kind of heavy medications I'm seeing some dogs put on. Another thing I see people do, which doesn't help the dog, is to avoid stress for the dog. It's been shown that stress is essential for living creatures to become resilient and make any kind of progress. However, the common thought that dogs will crumble under any kind of challenge or stress decreases dogs' welfare. Dogs are designed to seek pleasure and to overcome challenges and be curious. So just think about free roaming and feral dogs. If these dogs crumbled when they experienced any kind of stress, they would never have populated the earth the way they have. They are very successful creatures. They are very resilient. And when they experience something scary, usually if they have support, they will go back and try it again if left to their own devices. So you can watch a dog who's maybe scared of an object And that dog might kind of like woof at a distance and then kind of move around and sniff, might go towards the object a little bit and then get scared and back up. And then I'll take a break and then get brave again and go investigate the object until it kind of checks it out. So that dog is actually putting itself into stress, but kind of supporting itself through that because curiosity takes over, right? And also the dog wants to check it out and know what it is so they know if it's safe or not. So, again, like I said in the beginning, it's important to how you experience stress and how much stress you put on the dog at one time. But I will tell you that dogs can go through a lot more stress than I've seen a lot of trainers give them credit for. This isn't saying that you should go out and put a ton of stress on a dog. I've kind of fine-tuned this over the years, and I can recognize when a dog is too stressed out and they need a break. And when I need to come back to it later, usually because I need to build up more trust with that dog and go through smaller steps to help them achieve a goal. But a lot of times, especially when learning how to walk on leash, the only way around stress is to not teach them how to walk on a leash. And then while that dog is avoiding stress, it's also still scared, can't go for walks, so we need to really look at the welfare of the dog. And again, like Temple Grandin said, not get in our own head as to what we think is bad for the dog and what we've been told is bad for the dog. We need to actually, be very objective and look at how that dog is doing overall, maybe not in that exact short moment. And I'll give you an example. So I have the feral puppy in Trix, and I took her upstairs to show her around up there because she was going to sleep in our room in a crate overnight. And then we went to go back down the stairs. Going down a flight of stairs is usually, a little scary to any dog if they've never done it before. And of course, this dog had never seen stairs. I have to get her down the stairs. I can't let her just stay upstairs. So I have a couple options, right? What I ended up doing was I used a little tension on the leash, tried to get her to take some steps down the stairs, and she was like, oh, no way, no how. Right? And she kind of freaked out and backed up. So I was like, okay, that's not going to work. So then I sat down on the first step down from where she was. And again, I've already built up a little bit of trust with this dog from teaching her how to walk on a leash and her being around me. She actually came up to me and put her 2 feet on that first step down. And then what I did was, of course, I just waited a minute. And then I moved down to the second step. And then she was like, oh, no way. It's too much, right? So then what I did was put a little more tension on the leash and kind of pop her front feet down to the second step. And that was a little bit of stress for her. But she learned that going down those stairs wasn't going to hurt her and that she was okay. And then she walked down the rest of the stairs. And it was not an issue now. So if what people say is true, that kind of stress will make a dog more fearful. So this morning she should have really freaked out over the stairs, right? But she didn't. What she did was hesitate a little bit at the top of the stairs. I put a little tension on the leash and she just walked right down them. I will say again, like this has to be done with empathy. And I did let her back up initially when she started freaking out and showed her a lot of empathy. But I also did put a little bit of stress on her to get her to go down the stairs. And I can't pick her up, by the way. People might be tempted to pick up a dog in that situation, but I don't want to do that. She's kind of big and she doesn't really trust me that much yet. I haven't worked on fully picking her up. When they were smaller, they wouldn't let you pick them up either. And I don't have to because the dog can go down the stairs. This is not about flooding. So flooding Actually, the whole premise of flooding is that you expose the dog to so much stress that its nervous system just shuts down, and it can't have any fight or flight going on in its body anymore, and it just kind of acquiesces. Right? So that is not what I do at all. I would not recommend that. I think it breaks a lot of trust. There are very extreme examples where that might be the case. Let's say the dog is injured and it has to see a vet, like right then, it's an emergency, right? In that case, yes, it's about health and safety for the dog. The key to the supporting the dog is to tap into some curiosity, teach the dog some skills to work up to the challenge. And honestly, they're much more capable of what most people think they are. And a lot of dogs could be helped a lot more efficiently if we knew how to properly put stress on a dog so it can improve. I also have to wonder how people feel about stress themselves, and if they're kind of throwing that onto the dog, and again, it's goes back to actually looking at the dog in front of you instead of assuming. So you can't assume, you have to actually watch the dog. When a feral puppy comes to my house or I'm working with it, its life is full of these little challenges. And I find that they may be a little stressed out while they're out with me, but the next time they see me, they actually come up to me, or they're sitting up instead of hiding. So the dog is telling me that these things are working, and somehow the dog is benefiting from it. This little puppy, I brought her home yesterday, and this morning she was wagging her tail at me. Again, I'm observing the dog and making adjustments if I see things that I'm doing are not working for the dog or helping it. 5, one of the other things I see that isn't helping the dog is not doing naturally rewarding behaviors with a dog. Feral and free-roaming dogs typically know really well how to be a dog. They're very good at it. They're good at surviving. They're good at navigating potentially dangerous situations. They're good at finding food and all of these things. Fearful dogs may not. It depends why they act that way, what their skill set is. So, for example, a dog that was in a hoarding case and kept in a cage is going to be a little different than a dog who's been out exploring the world on its own. But regardless, I find that doing natural behaviors with the dog is going to trigger some kind of feel-good capabilities within the dog. So dogs generally like to explore, they like to walk, they like to sniff, they want to dig, they like to climb, watch things, observe things, hunt things. But most of all, they want to belong to a pro-social group of people, and dogs and maybe cats or some other animals. Especially feral and free-roaming dogs know how important this is. There was, I forget his name, there was a guy that studied free-roaming dogs in Baltimore. The dogs in his study were comprised of dogs that actually had a home, but they were let out for the day and they kind of roamed the neighborhood. And then there was a group of feral dogs that lived on their own. And he found that the feral dogs worked much more as a pro-social group. And the dogs who were let out during the day didn't associate with other dogs as much, because he thought it was because they had their social group at home. If you watch dogs, they're really good at cooperating and surviving together and communication. So just like us, they want to belong to a group. This is one of my main motivators I use with these fearful and feral dogs, is to use their need to belong to a group. I don't need to use food to activate this. I don't need to use toys. It's innate in a dog. It's also innate in us. If you start speaking the dog's language and you start doing things that are naturally rewarding to the dog, you're going to become more relevant to the dog. You're going to become very important in how that dog views survival. They'll see you as an asset in their survival versus just some human walking around that gives them food or, appears once in a while and tries to touch them. If you actually engage in their survival and doing those activities I mentioned, especially sniffing, you'll make huge headway with a fearful or feral dog. And sometimes people are like, oh yeah, I give my dog a snuffle mat, or I let it sniff while I'm holding the leash. But this is not what I'm talking about. Those things, the human is passive in that activity. So if you just give a dog a snuffle mat, there's nothing wrong with doing that. It's good entertainment for them. They enjoy it, but it's not building a social activity with a person. You're not being included in that activity to benefit their survival or, just to have fun, right? When you take a dog on a walk, you have to actually participate a little bit in sniffing with a dog, or at least looking out for safety like a dog does, for you to become interesting to a dog. And I've done all kinds of crazy stuff to try to, gain a dog's trust. I've dug with them in the dirt. I've climbed on lots of rocks, and I've gone, wading in a lake, and I sit in the yard and watch the birds go by, and I do sniff a lot with them. And for dogs that are more resistant to sniff, sometimes I'll plant little things around the yard to lead them to have them sniff, because sniffing has tons of benefits on its own. Because of this type of engagement is overwhelmingly lacking in dog training, I developed my no-centric dog training and rehabilitation system. The basis of no-centric is to help a dog heal by doing natural behaviors with the dog, especially sniffing. I've connected and started building trust with completely feral dogs by sniffing something they like to many times over. And again, you don't have to get down on your hands and knees to do this either. You can just kind of maybe lean over a little, squat down. In a dog that's really afraid of people, I don't do any of those things. I just stand and kind of point towards the thing and make a little noise. 9 times out of 10, they'll actually go sniff what I was pretending to sniff. I mean, I can't smell it. I'm doing the behavior, but I can't actually smell what it is. So, I take part in hunting mice with my dog Tipton. It helps me keep the area around my house free of mice. And, it's amazing to watch the dogs perk up, even if they're quote unquote normal dogs, when their human starts engaging with them in this way. They really, really enjoy it. Another way I do stuff with my dog this time of year is, I'll go pick juniper berries for them in the yard. They really love juniper berries, or I'll hold the branch down lower for them so they can eat the berries. It's just simple things like that, but helping them survive better and do a behavior they use for survival or natural behavior. Sniffing, by the way, is shown to improve mood and calm vagus nerve systems in humans. Also, they have taken out the olfactory bulb of mice. What they found is that when they did that, the mice got depressed and anxious. So if you think about it, giving that mouse back its olfactory bulb would then help it be not depressed and not anxious. And a lot of times that's what we want our fearful and feral dogs to do, is to become braver and happier and not scared. Activating that olfactory bulb and all the good things that go with it can actually improve the dog's mood, not just engage with you. And the last thing that I see people not do with fearful and feral dogs is to really concentrate on becoming trustworthy before doing any kind of formal training. Acknowledging what the dog finds concerning and looking at it, or sniffing the air, not licking it, looking. You got to sniff a little bit so your dog can hear it, but the neighbors don't have to hear you, so they don't have to know what you're doing. That way the dog knows we are aware of our surroundings and we can protect them, and we're a worthy pack member. So a good example of this is, when we're walking out of my driveway, the driveway opens up into a street And almost every dog, even my quote unquote normal dogs, want to just pause and kind of assess the environment there. As humans, I don't think we even think about it. We'll just walk right from a smaller space to a larger space and not even consider our safety. We are kind of losing the need to do that as humans, but our dogs still have that need to do that. And so in that situation, if I just stop a minute and look around with them and be like, okay, it's fine, let's go. Dog's like, oh, great, she's already looked out for me. It's fantastic. Another example is getting a dog out of the car. So if the dog is in the car and then you pull up to a park and you open the hatch and they're sitting there in the car, I always give them a minute to just look around and assess the situation before asking them to come out of the car. And if you sit with your dog and watch them do this, then you actually realize how important it is to them. I think, again, a lot of times we're just in a hurry. We're like, get out of the car, dog, and we're like, come on. But if we just take, it's even like a minute. It's not a lot of time. And just let our dogs do their behaviors and even engage in those behaviors with them, that the dog will learn to trust us a lot more because we're aware of the environment and therefore we can protect them. And one of the biggest mistakes I hear of a lot of people doing, and again, it's all over the internet to do this with dogs, so I can't blame the people. They're only doing what's been advised to them, is sitting in a kennel with a fearful or feral dog hoping to earn trust. This does not work. Again, why doesn't it work? The dog may learn you're not going to hurt it, but it's not building any kind of interaction or trust building activity like the ones I've just talked about. In fact, I think what it does is really confuse the dog, because when a dog is in a shelter or maybe in a room at a home or a garage or wherever it happens to be, that becomes its territory. It's its safe space. And then when the person shows up and goes to sit in there and maybe read a book, or they sit there and ignore the dog, look on their phone, and even worse, try and get the dog to come to them taking food, all they're doing is invading that dog's territory and putting pressure on the dog. And people don't realize this because they think all they're doing is sitting there. But if you're sitting there and expecting a dog to change its behavior, or you're holding out your hand with food, invading the dog's space, and expecting the dog to do something, that is a lot of psychological pressure. So what I would advise, instead of doing those things, is to do the other things I've talked about in this podcast. Get the dog out and moving. Do something the dog finds really beneficial for its survival, or that it really enjoys doing. At first, the dog's going to look like it's not going to enjoy much at all. But after a session or two, you will find the dog does improve. And before you know it, the dog will be walking on leash, and you can take it to the lake or climb on rocks, or bring it home and take it to a foster home and start some rehab. If I were to just sit in the kennel with all the feral dogs that I've rehabilitated, they probably would still be where they were at when I started sitting with them. With these dogs, you can go in there and sit there all day long. And unless you show them the value of interacting with you, they're not going to change very easily. So these dogs, you have to remember, these dogs have survived on their own without human intervention. They don't need us to feed them or give them entertainment or socialization or anything like that. They've gotten all those needs met by other dogs, most likely. We have to make ourselves valuable to them in the way that other dogs have, and then we can really make some breakthroughs. And we don't have to sit in the kennel with them either. We can actually get them out moving and do something productive. I hope you enjoyed this little talk. Again, one of my favorite subjects, talking about fearful and feral dogs. They've taught me a ton. And they've really helped me teach less fearful and feral dogs how to behave better and to have an enriched life with their human. And the good thing about some of the stuff I do is that it's quite easy to teach people once you understand the concept. And a lot of, dog parents can enjoy doing things like this with their dog. It doesn't rely on a lot of great timing or, having a lot of things in your hand, but they do have to be open to doing some new behaviors with their dog. If you'd like some more information about these concepts, you can go to my website, to my no-centric page. It's Hart, to Hart Canine, H-A-R-T, the number 2, H-E-A-R-T, CANINE.com. I also have workshops where I teach people how to do this, and I do welcome people that have fearful and feral dogs of their own. You do not have to be a trainer to attend my workshops, although it also helps trainers, rescue staff, and shelter staff quite a bit. I hope I learned something about how your dog may be seeing the world and how you can form a better relationship with them. Thank you so much for joining me and spending your valuable time with me and showing an interest in fearful and feral dogs.